Well, we are so excited that it is the first Sunday of Advent and that we begin our Unraveling series. This morning we're going to start in Luke chapter 1, verses 5 through 17. This is what it says. In the days of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly order of Abijah. His wife was a descendant of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. Both of them were righteous before God, living blamelessly according to all the commandments and regulations of the Lord. But they had no children, because Elizabeth was barren, and both were getting on in years. Once, when he was serving as a priest before God and his section was on duty, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to enter the sanctuary of the Lord and offer incense. Now at the time of the incense offering, the whole assembly of the people was praying outside. Then there appeared to him an angel of the Lord, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was terrified, and fear overwhelmed him. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will name him John. You will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He must never drink wine or strong drink. Even before his birth, he will be filled with the Holy Spirit. He will turn many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God. With the spirit and power of Elijah, he will go before him to turn the hearts of parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." So I think we should start with sort of talking about this concept of unraveling. I think you pointed out that typically when we say unraveling, it's not necessarily a positive connotation. And so as the sermon today is called Unraveling Hopelessness, I think maybe we need a little bit of explanation there.
Yeah, I think, one of the things we kind of wrote out in the series is like, okay, well, when you're trying to detangle something, you've got like cords that are wrapped up and it's all mixed up and you've got to figure out which way it wants to go. Well, never once have I been handed a bundle of cords and somebody said like, unravel this for me.
Untangle or
Instead,
something.
it's untangle. And so as I began to think about that word unravel, so often things begin to unravel when I don't want them to. I've got a piece of rope that I've been trying to tie onto one of the children's toys, and all of a sudden it starts to break apart on me, and all the threads have come loose. I'm in the middle of something in my life, and then everything starts to fall apart, right? It all unravels. And so I think really unraveling so often is something that catches us off guard. And yet I think there are times where when the unraveling catches us off guard, it might be a good thing. I got a silly example of that in that I was playing with my children last night, as I'm prone to do, and Benjamin made this heart out of Legos for me. And so every time he handed it to me, I just pretended like I just had a much bigger heart and I was just a nicer dad, right? So he would hand it, I was like, y'all should just stay up all night. It would just be so good to spend time together, right? You don't need to sleep. When you sleep, we can't be together, and it's just terrible. And then the more I held it, the just nicer I got, right? And eventually I thought, it'd be fun. Let's just see how nice we can be because it's Christmas. Right? I just said, we just have so much as a family. We have so many toys we already don't play with. We have so many things. We should clean out a lot. And then we don't even need presents this Christmas. There's so many people who don't have anything. We already have so much. And they go, "Give me the heart, Dad. Give it back to us. We need the presents." I was like, "I'll just call Santa." "Don't call." And then the heart got... And so what needed to happen there is there's an unraveling, right? Because we do have a lot. We do have... But what are the expectations? What are the things that are there? And there are times where we think we've got it all together, we think we know. And yet if we were to unravel, if we were to remove, if things were to kind of break apart and we could see what was essential, what we were left with might be the thing that's most important.
Yeah, so I think that's sort of an interesting concept of a way to view unraveling, almost as a positive thing. Because you didn't give this example, but me as a crafter, I think of unraveling as like, someone hit the yarn and it's all over the place, and it's something that's inconvenient. It's something that makes me feel uncomfortable, something I don't like. But in our context, we're going to look at it as, yes, something that might make you feel uncomfortable, something that you might not love, but ultimately this unraveling can be a positive thing. So I think that kind of brings us to our story today as we start to look at this idea of unraveling hopelessness. And I think it's sort of obvious in our story that, Zechariah and Elizabeth had gotten to a place where it says, they were getting on in years, which just means they were old, too old to have children. And so they had most likely given up the hope of ever having a child. And I think that there may be things like that in our lives where we have given up hope on things. And I think the opportunity that we're going to look at this morning is, what would it look like, as uncomfortable as it might be, to unravel some of the hopelessness that we feel about certain things?
Yeah, and I think taking that idea of the definition we've lifted up, part of it is sometimes we hold on to hopelessness without realizing we've done it. There was an interesting study that this guy did that I can't stop reading about, but he studied propaganda. And a lot of times we think about propaganda the way the Nazis used it. It's specifically meant to get you to detest or villainize a certain group of people, pushes you against a group of people. It's us versus them. And that's a huge piece of it. That's one huge piece of propaganda. But there's a second piece of it. And part of it is inundating you with so much just information so that you get just so either angry or frustrated, and you just focus on that. Well, why did they do that? Why did they make that appointment? Why this law, right? Or you've got this statue of a world leader outside of your train station. Every time you get out, there's a statue of Stalin or Putin. It's just there. And part of propaganda's goal with that is it gets you so angry or caught up in the way that the world is that you forget to dream about what the world could be. And so part of when we hold on to hopelessness, we get so caught up in, this is the way the world is. This is the way the world is always going to be. There's nothing that I can do about it. This is my lot in life. This is my situation. It just is. That's hopelessness. Hopelessness is the belief that nothing can change. And so when you look at a story like Zechariah and Elizabeth, that's there, right? They wanted something and they couldn't make it happen. They did everything they could. They prayed, they hoped, they dreamed of a world that could be, and it didn't happen. And the challenge then is, it happens, and then what do you do with it? But also there's an overarching story in the Gospel of Luke. And part of the overarching story is the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth is meant to remind us in the Old Testament of Abraham and Sarah. They also wanted a child. It also started the birth of something new, a new nation, a new peoples. And so here's this again, right? It's going to be something new, a new nation, a new peoples, a new covenant. And so we're meant to make that parallel, but it's also, again, Luke has this common thread that runs throughout of the priestly class being silenced and a prophet's voice coming in anew. And Zechariah and Elizabeth are both from the priestly class. They are both teachers, heralds. They're from that lineage. John is from that lineage. And yet John, we're told from the very beginning, is not going to be a priest. He's going to be a prophet. And part of the way we know that is you were not supposed to drink wine or eat fancy if you were going to be a mouthpiece for God, because being drunk or otherwise distracted prevents you from doing your religious duties. So John's being set up not as a priest, but as a foreteller of what's to come. And so there's so much going on in the story that would have brought hope to a people feeling hopeless, like nothing was ever going to change. This is a catalyst moment. It would be really big.
Yeah, and I think we sort of see this picture painted of what God's work in the world looks like. So I was thinking about hope this week, and for those of you, if there's any of you that are also Texas Aggies, y'all know how we get in this cycle of hoping when we know better. We know we shouldn't do it, but we do it anyway, and then our hopes get crushed year after year after year.
I was worried about your spirit coming into the office this morning.
You knew it was going to come up. You knew this was going to be brought up.
I was like, this is not a great topic after this game.
But it's a funny example, and it's a small example, right? But it's something that I notice that I do, right? Or that I'll say that I've done for years and years as I kind of get my hopes up. And I got them up this year. Everybody knows after we beat LSU, I was in here talking tough. I brought it up in the prayers. People are like, what are you saying? And then, of course, we go and lose the next week to South Carolina, and my hopes are kind of dashed. And one thing, though, that I have realized in that, again, small example, is that sometimes hoping hurts. Sometimes hoping is very painful because you allow yourself to set, an expectation on something that may or may not happen. And we're going to talk about expectations more next week, but it's just something that I've noticed can be painful. And it's a lot different when that hope is on the hope for a baby, or the hope for a better job, or the hope for a healed relationship. And so that hope can really be scary when we're out there on our own, hoping for some of these bigger things in life. But I think what we see in this story is sort of a picture of who God is. So yes, you bring up how this is to remind us of, how Sarah was wanting a baby, and she finally had one. I think that it paints this picture that, hey, God is still here. No matter how hard it is to hope, no matter how hard it is to keep going, this is who I am, and this is where I am in your life. I think that it shows us a story about God's redemptive power, God's continuance of being there, and this idea that God never forgets us.
Yeah, and I think so often we end up in a place of hopelessness when we feel out of control.
Yes.
This week we're traveling to Shreveport for Thanksgiving. And we stopped at Buc-ee's, like you do. And then we kept driving, and as we were driving, our battery light came on. And Caitlin was driving, and she was like, why is this light on? And I was like, well, let's Google it. Right? It's 2024. We're not going to pull the manual out of the glove compartment.
Don't be insane.
Way too complicated. So I Google it, and it's like, oh, well, since it came in while we were driving, looks like our alternator's real bad. And she was like, well, what do we do with that? And I was like, well, it says pull over immediately because you probably can't go very far. So we should probably pull over. We got 3 kids in the car. So we did, and I checked all the connections and tried to get there's corrosion on the battery, and I get it cleaned up, and I turned the car on, and I was like, no light, should be good to go. We made it another 10 minutes down the road. It was the alternator. But then we're trapped. Right? And we're stuck. And so, long story short, my dad comes and gets the kids and us to Shreveport. My brother and I go pick the car up on a trailer the next morning, and we drop it off. And then the car dealership just keeps calling us and telling us one thing and then another thing, and it's going to be ready here, and then it's not going to be ready until Tuesday, and then I don't have any control over that.
Yeah.
They've got my car hostage. I can't just go get it. Right, we had to drag it in on a trailer.
Right.
And I had no control. And as I was thinking about that situation, I was feeling hopeless. Right, it's a lot of money. We're out. I can't do anything about where they have it or when it's going to be ready. And I'm trying to prepare for this, where we're talking about hopelessness. Like one of the things that I realized is we feel so hopeless when we're not in control. And yet, part of having hope is realizing that we've never been in control.
That's right.
God's been in control the whole time. And part of having hope is understanding that no matter an outcome, right, God is at work. And God will be there and God will be present. Zechariah and Elizabeth are faithful.
Right.
And faithful in ways that we can't imagine. They're following dietary restrictions that you and I wouldn't follow because a Hat Creek bacon burger is top tier. They are spending their time in the temple. Zechariah has to spend time away from family in the temple, following his duties. They are giving their gifts, their tithes, their offerings, their sacrifices, and their prayers still aren't being answered in their timeline. And I think that's a huge challenge for so many of us in a world where we want things from God.
That's right.
And some of the things we want aren't things that are selfish things. It's like we're not asking God for a new car. We're asking God to cure our mom from cancer.
That's right.
Right? We're not asking God for a promotion. We're asking God to take care of our child who we feel like is lost and is struggling with addiction and we don't know what to do. And when those prayers don't get answered, we, one, go, well, should I have any hope? Is God at work at all? But then two, we begin to lean into this idea, I think, of just struggling with any kind of hope or any kind of answer or any way
Yeah.
in which God is at work, or we have hope, or God is not, like, what do we do with that? And I think this story is a great reminder of God answers prayers. Maybe not always the way that we think, maybe not always the way that we want, but prayers are answered, and often not in a time we expect. Because I know a lot of folks who are the age that we think Zechariah and Elizabeth probably were, who, if they found out they were having a child, might not give thanks for that, right? And or celebrate that. So I think it's just one of the many things where we talk about, okay, well, how do we not live in a hopelessness? I think one of the ways is recognizing that God is in charge.
Yeah, I mean, two of the things that you said kind of crossed over, and some of the things that I've been thinking about this week, because you're right. Some of the times we are hoping for really big stuff. Like, yes, you might be hoping for a promotion, but it's so that you can feed your family. It's so that you can pay your bills. Or you're right, we might be hoping for someone to be healed, or any number of things. And I think there's this idea that hope is not wishful thinking that something's going to happen, but hope is trust. Hope is trust in God. And I think in that reframing, that's helped me to think about what hope really is. When you see someone and you are hoping for the best for someone, you are trusting that God is with that person. I think there's this other element that you brought up, because of course for Zechariah and Elizabeth, the timing we didn't understand. And there's this element of timing that we don't understand. And so we see someone suffering and we desperately want that to change, and yet it goes on and on and on. And I do think that's where we hit that decline, where we start to ask ourselves, okay, where is God? It's almost like there's like a blanket, like a heavy blanket that's put over us that we can't see our way out of, because we just don't understand the timing, and the timing can almost seem cruel. Like, why doesn't this happen sooner than I thought? But as we were saying, there's this reminder, I think, in the story that even in silence, God is there. Even when we feel like we can't see God, or God isn't anywhere in our story, God is there. It just is hard to understand sometimes.
Well, and then the converse, right? Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah,
It's like I tell it to my children all the time. They can quote that back to you. Comparison is the thief of joy. And so then, right, the opposite is true, right? Zechariah and Elizabeth watch people they know and love and care about, or just friends who aren't as faithful as them, who aren't doing the thing that they're getting blessings.
Yeah.
They're getting the things they prayed for. Sometimes they get the things that Zechariah and Elizabeth are praying for, they don't even want it.
Yeah.
And so you watch other people get blessings. You watch other people's mothers get healed. You watch other people's children come back home. You watch all of this unfold, and you go, well, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Did we not give enough in the offering this year at church, right? Like, I told you should have gone to that Bible study.
Yeah.
Right? This is all, that men's prayer breakfast was more important than you thought.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so then we start comparing our lives to others, going, man, they seem to be getting, prayers answered all day. What do I need to be doing?
Yeah.
And I think the challenge with that, right, comparison being the thief of joy, again, is God is always at work.
That's right.
I have hope that God is in control.
That's right.
And God is steering the ship. That means I then have to trust the timing that God is offering. Knowing that, and I get a lot of hope out of Zechariah's story, knowing that the timing is hardly ever what I expect. I've seen that play out in my life over and over and over again. But as we talk about unraveling, things coming apart, right? We also have to talk about what's left when we unravel. And when we unravel hopelessness, right, oftentimes what I think we're looking for hope. But maybe that's not all there is. Because I think oftentimes when we unravel hopelessness, what we find is support. What we find is the world maybe wasn't as bad as we thought it was. What we find was maybe God was there the whole time, but we were holding so hard onto that God wasn't, that we couldn't see God present.
Yeah.
And I think that's some of the challenge too. Scientists and sociologists tell us the thing that our parents always told us was true, that we didn't think was, which is who we hang out with matters, right? It can literally shape the course of your life. The people that you're surrounded with matters, because what they have learned is we rise to the level of people's expectations of us. We rise to the level of people's expectations for us, which means if we're around a whole bunch of people who think we're not going to amount to very much or who think they aren't going to amount to very much, guess what? We don't actually do a lot with our lives.
Right.
But if we are surrounded by people who have high expectations of us, they expect the best of us, they think that we can accomplish these things, and they set these goals, and they go, oh, no, you can definitely do this. We rise to that level. And I think one of the most important parts of our faith, one of the things we learn from this story, is that we rise to, yes, people's expectations of us. But what Jesus comes and teaches us in this season, when Jesus comes and wraps himself in flesh as Emmanuel, is we can also rise to the level of God's expectations for us. And in that, right, there is great hope. Because no matter where we are in our lives, where we are in the world, no matter who is surrounding us, when we rise to the level of God's expectations, we rise to a level of hope and a level of faith that sees us through some of the darkest, most challenging times. In the midst of that, that's when hopelessness really unravels. Because what we lean into is we are living into the expectations that God has placed on our lives. And that's faith. That's faith. And that's challenging.
Well, yeah, I think that there's so much that we could talk about in this, but I do think that idea of what's left, that support, and then that offers us the opportunity to be messengers of hope, not just to others, but in our own lives and our own families. And so I think as we think about that today, if we unravel some of the hopelessness that we're feeling, what support is there for us? Where is God in it?
And things that we pray for don't always end up the way we expect.
That's right.
Caitlin and I have a friend, really she has a friend from childhood. They're my friend now because I watch them on Facebook. All he has ever wanted in his life was to be a dad. Prayed for it, gone to church for it, gone to confession for it. He just wanted to be a dad. And it just wasn't meant to be. They did all of the things so that he could be a dad. IVF, you name it. But it just wasn't going to work. That they kept praying, and finally they thought, you know what, we're going to adopt. We're going to put ourselves out there, and we're going to adopt. And you know, we want an older kid, which you don't see a lot in the adoption world. We want an older kid who maybe doesn't have, you know, a home or a family. You know, we want to be that family for them. And they got a call, and they said, we got an older kid for you. They're about 7 years old, but right now they've got to go in the foster system. Their parents, drug addicts, one's in jail, one's a drug addict, but they have a chance to get their act together, so they've got to go in foster care. Would you consider filling out an application and becoming foster parents so that you can foster and then hopefully eventually adopt this child? And they said, yeah. And they said, well, tell us more about them. And they said, well, they're 7, and they've got, 2 younger siblings. One's 3, and one's about 6 months old. They said, and we're going to, find spaces. And they said, can we have them too? And so they fill out the application, and they foster to adopt. And now they've got these 3 kids in their home that they may or may not get to keep. But they've opened it up. Yeah. And he gets to be a dad this Christmas. And it is not what he prayed for. Yeah. But it's what he prayed for. It's not what he hoped for, but it's what he hoped for. And in all of those days of hopelessness and all of those days of longing and all those days of wanting, he never could have imagined the way that God took his situation and transformed it. And yet, he held on. And I think that's the biggest thing for me as we lean into this season of unraveling hopelessness is sometimes letting go of our expectation of the world we want and seeing the world that is and all of the beauty that God has provided in it. That's unraveling hopelessness, leading to hope, leading to love, and leading to transformation.
Well, amen.